John 1, and especially 1:1, is a verse that people use to claim it's calling Jesus God, and I refute it all the time, and I get criticized for it all the time, called names, just typical of people who don't understand and don't take the time to research how the Bible is written and what the language of the day was and the meanings behind the things that were written. John, um, understand when he wrote the book, he had already seen everything. And every apostle starts their books off the way they want to, and they end them the way they want to. John is no different. He started his off different than the others. So he's talking about stuff he's already knows, he's already seen. But he felt it's important to understand the word and to explain it where it comes from. And so he starts off uh, his book, the book of John, and he starts off with in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And so this gets confusing for people because they say, how can the Word be with God and God at the same time? And then they throw in later on where it says, and the Word becomes flesh. And so they're like, well, if the Word becomes flesh, if the Word is God, then, they claim Jesus must be God. The Word is God, the Word is flesh. That's not how it works. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. This word right here is deceiving because the original translation of it says that the same was with God in the beginning, not he. It says the same was with God in the beginning. And so we look at this word same, this, these, etc. is the word same. It's not a he. So he was put in there and used out of text. And he was in the beginning with God is not true. This should be same. Same, which is referring back to word. Okay? This is where it gets confusing, is because this is one of the changes that has been made by people who want to claim that Jesus is God. Trinitarians have changed this. Take it away. If that word said same was in the beginning with God, how many people would be saying it's a he or it's referring to a he? But that's not the case. So we have to deal with what we've got. All right? We're going to deal with that. So what we have now is same was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, which would be referring to God. And without him, referring to God, nothing was made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. This is a confusing. Let me get back here. That gets confusing for people when they see that, because Jesus claimed to be the light of man. I am the light of the world and the light of the man. But God was the light of man, and Jesus was doing God's work for him. So in him was the light, but the light started with God, and it still gets confusing. Behold, God works all these things twice, in fact, 3 times with a man, to bring back his soul from the pit, that he may be enlightened with the light of life. And so this, the light of life, comes from God. God works all these things. So when John was talking about in him was life, and the life was the light of men, he's still talking about God. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. Well, that is true. That's the complaint that God had with the people of the Old Testament. O house of Jacob, come and let us walk in the light of the Lord. And so the light is God. And we're still back to in this first chapter of John. Okay, so with all these things, God made everything. In him was life, the life of the light of men. Genesis 1:26 is where it gets tricky. God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. And I'll stop there. There's no reason to say the rest of that verse. This is the one where people are saying that he must have been talking to Jesus, and between the two of them, they made man in their image. Okay. This is blown way out of proportion. Let me show you that. God said, make man image, likeness, dominion, fish, sea, air. There's no our image there. There's no let us in there. So let us make man in our image has been added. That's not true. If we go to Elohim, the most common is people like to use the plural use of it. But they totally forget about this singular meaning. God, goddess, God-like one, works or special possessions of God, the true God. You see this one right here, the true God, and God singular, okay? So God singular said, make man image likeness. More than likely, he wanted man to be in his image. And there's no us in it. There's no let us make man in our image. There's no us. There's no our. There's no let us. So that's important to understand that, okay? I'm going to go back to John 1. In the beginning was the Word. The Word, what? And the Spirit of God descended on Jesus. Okay, so in the beginning was the voice. The voice was with God, and voice was God. Voice, the Spirit of God. Same was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him. In him was life. I've already shown that. The light shine in the darkness. We go on down here. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we beheld his glory. Now here's where Trinitarians stop. Well, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Well, up here it says the Word was God. And down here, well, it says the Word became flesh. Well, that means God became flesh and dwelt among us. That's not what it says. And we beheld his glory, which would be the glory as the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. So Jesus became the Son of God, flesh-born Son of God. He became that when Mary got pregnant, but he wasn't preaching until he was 30 years old. So the flesh and the Word became flesh through Mary. This part right there is left off by Trinitarians. They focus on the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and then they focus on, God was the Word. And they don't focus on as the only begotten of the Father. The only begotten, here's something tricky, guys, people. Listen. Only begotten means just exactly what it says. It doesn't mean only son. It means only begotten. Jesus, the only begotten Son, he's the only flesh-born Son that God has. Jesus was a spirit being in heaven because that's what lives in heavens, his spirits. He was a spirit being. He was sent down to earth. He came down. He became flesh. God made Mary pregnant. Jesus became flesh. And when he was 30 years old, God put his spirit in him so he could perform works and finish his works. Like Jesus said, I am here to finish my Father's works. And so the tricky of that is people want to ignore the only begotten of the Father. God has many sons. Genesis 6:2, Job 38:7 talks about the sons of God. Not angels, sons. Can't be translated any other way. God has many sons. And the woman in Revelation 12 had more offspring than Jesus, if you read the latter part of it, that Satan went after the woman's offspring. So she had more children besides Jesus. And so it's important to understand that why John pointed this out. The glory as of the only begotten of the Father. Let me get back on that. The glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. And so the Word became flesh, dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory. The glory as the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. End of story. Really? I mean, that's pretty much it, isn't it? Okay, you recall how I said at the beginning how John wrote the book and he wrote it the way he saw fit? So what this is was spoken before John ever wrote the book. But he recalls it. And this is what Jesus said, "He who does not love me does not keep my words. And the word which you hear is not mine, but the Father's who sent me." If you go and take that same meaning of word, you find out it's the same word. Let me pull it up here. Loveth me not, keep not my sayings, and the word, same word right there, the word that was with God in the beginning. Word which you hear is not mine, but the Father's who sent me. Here Jesus is saying exactly what John said. John said the Word was God. Jesus just said, he just said the Word is God. This is what Genesis in chapter 1, verse 19. A woman appeared in heaven, clothed with what? The sun, the moon. She had 12 stars. She cried out in labor pain. Another sign appeared where? In heaven. And so here we have the woman's in heaven with the sun and the moon and the stars. That was all taken care of by the fourth day of creation in verse 19. So the evening and morning were the fourth day. So this is the firmament of the heavens to give light and all this. Up to this point, from 1:1 to 1:19, is the creation of the heavens and the earth. So we know that all of this going down here was already created, and then she gave birth to Jesus, a male child who was rule all nations with a rod of iron, and that is Jesus. Her child was caught up to God and his throne. So what does this tell us? This tells us there is no way, absolutely no way, that Jesus was with God in the beginning. All these things existed up to Genesis 1:19, existed, including Satan, a great fiery dragon. Satan existed before Jesus was born. She bore a male child after all those things were created. And her child, Jesus, was caught up to God and his throne because God and his throne already existed. So there is bona fide proof that Jesus was not with God in the beginning. There is bona fide proof that Jesus is not the Word. Look at Revelation. Revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants. And he sent and signified it by his angel to his servant John. What? Who bore witness to the Word of God. Understand. And to the testimony of Jesus Christ. Did you catch that? The Word of God and Jesus Christ. In chapter 19, he was clothed with a robe dipped in blood, and his name was called the Word of God. His name is not called God. His name is called the Word of God. So, as you can see, John 1:1 is, or the whole book, first chapter in John, is pretty confusing if you don't research what some of these words mean. What causes a person to research it is when they see contradictions in there, okay? Well, Jesus is calling God his Father. Well, if the Word became flesh, if Jesus is the Word, and if Jesus is God, and then how is he calling God his Father? And so it becomes a very confusing, and that's why you have to dig a little deeper, and that's what this video is about, is to help people who are digging or have dug try to understand what's going on with these Trinitarians who keep coming up and claiming that Jesus said he was God in John 1:1. He never said that, and neither did John. John never said it. John was correct. He said the Word was God. Jesus was correct. He said the Word was God. Jesus said the Word is not mine, but him who sent me. So both of them said the Word is God. None of them said that Jesus was God. Okay, so there isn't a whole lot more I can expand on this. I mean, I could go on all day long probably if I get off on other tangents. But my message here is to try to get people to understand that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Simple fact. John said the Word was God. He didn't say the Word was Jesus. Do you really think John is so arrogant and so stupid that he would conceal, if Jesus was God, do you think he would really conceal it or make it like, oh, you have to now look and see? No. He was trying to tell you. Again, he wrote the book the best way he understood or thought it would work out for people. So he had seen all this stuff, and then he writes the book. So he starts off, he goes, how am I going to do this? Well, Jesus is the Word of God. Jesus came down, and he had the power of God, could speak for God and speak as if he were God, because it was God speaking through him. I'll tell the people where the Word is and what it is first. So he comes out and he says, well, and the Word was God. The Word was with God in the beginning, and the Word was God. Plain and simple. But you have to understand all that to understand how plain and simple that really is. Well, I try not to make this too long. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have learned something.